Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracking the incredible, honestly almost paradoxical trajectory of a man sitting right at the center of a potential constitutional earthquake in the UK. I'm talking about Andy Burnham. We're going to map out exactly how a working-class kid from the Northwest became a total Westminster insider, abandoned the whole shebang to become a regional rebel, and has now executed this stunning maneuver to return to the national stage. So you might be wondering, why is a single, seemingly local by-election in the Northwest being called one of the most consequential moments in modern British history? I mean, it sounds like a massive exaggeration, right? But seriously, this specific election sets the stage for a seismic shift in how the United Kingdom is governed, and it revolves entirely around this one figure. Let's look at the date. June 18, 2026. That's when Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham won the Makerfield by-election. But listen, this return to Parliament, it is not just a simple job change. Not even close. It essentially cleared a direct path for him to challenge Prime Minister Keir Starmer for the Labour leadership. To really understand how we got to this boiling point, we have to rewind and look at the man himself. Part 1. The Westminster Insider. Long before he was clashing with prime ministers over regional funding, Burnham was deeply embedded in the exact same establishment he now criticizes. It all starts with his working-class roots. Born in Aintree to a BT engineer and a receptionist, and raised in Colchester, Burnham's early life completely shaped his political DNA. Get this, he joined the Labour Party at just 15 years old. He was deeply impacted, radicalized even, by the 1984 miners' strike. And even as he went on to study English at Cambridge University, he credits his Catholic high school upbringing and its focus on social teaching as the real foundation of his politics today. And he didn't just walk into the new Labour establishment, he practically sprinted up the ranks. Starting out as a researcher for Tessa Jowell back in 1994, he was elected as the MP for Lee by 2001. Under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, he held some truly massive cabinet roles. We're talking Chief Secretary to the Treasury in 2007, Culture Secretary in 2008, and Health Secretary in 2009. He gained deep structural experience in the very centralized system he'd later end up fighting against tooth and nail. 2. That's the number of times he ran for the Labour Party leadership, once in 2010 and again in 2015. And, well, he lost badly both times. But you know what? These defeats were actually a huge blessing in disguise. They forced him right out of the Westminster bubble and made him completely rethink his entire approach to politics. Which brings us to part 2, King of the North. This marks his total transformation from a typical establishment insider to an absolute regional powerhouse. So, in 2017, he ventures into the political wilderness. He actually resigns from the shadow cabinet, leaves national politics entirely behind, and becomes the very first Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. And he won with a massive 63% of the vote. Over a transformative 9 years in that role, he just tossed out the traditional top-down Westminster model and started experimenting with this highly collaborative, captaincy style of local leadership. And yes, he literally got dubbed the King of the North. It's like something straight out of Game of Thrones, right? He earned that nickname during the COVID-19 pandemic, when he fiercely and very publicly took on the London-centric government. He was demanding proper furlough funding for northern communities that were facing those brutal Tier 3 lockdowns. He firmly stood his ground, and his popularity absolutely skyrocketed. He used that massive regional mandate to enact sweeping, tangible changes for the people there. Take the B Network, for instance. After a pretty grueling legal battle, he managed to bring buses back under public control for the first time outside London since the 1980s. He integrated the buses and trams into one unified, locally controlled public transport system. This wasn't just basic policy. This was a total rewrite of how local government could actually function. Now, for part 3, what is Manchesterism? This is the core economic framework he developed during his time as mayor, and it's actively challenging the status quo. Manchesterism is basically defined by what Burnham calls the productive state approach. It's an explicit rejection of that 1980s neoliberalism. Instead of just, regulating markets from afar, the government steps in to directly own and operate essential sectors. The overarching goal here is to lower the cost of basic services, stimulate regional productivity, and really reclaim public control over the absolute basics of life. We're talking transport, housing, energy, and water. Burnham himself calls this approach business-friendly socialism. He frames it as a modern, functional response to what he sees as a high-inequality, low-growth trap, a trap caused by hoarding all the political power in the London Treasury. He explicitly rejects trickle-down economics, arguing instead that the money generated by economic growth absolutely needs to be planted directly back into the communities that actually created it in the first place. Just think about this number for a second. £250. That is the estimated annual privatization premium that every single British household pays just for utilities. Burnham argues this money is basically being siphoned right out of people's pockets and funneled straight into corporate dividends, rather than being reinvested domestically. Manchesterism aims to completely stop that extraction. So, as you can see, it's a massive structural clash. On one side, you have the traditional, established Westminster orthodoxy, which is London-centric, treasury-led, top-down, and heavily reliant on the privatization of public infrastructure. But on the other side, you have Burnham's Manchesterism, which is entirely focused on a devolution revolution, a collaborative captaincy style of local government, and the public ownership of those essential community assets. Let's move to part 4, Return to Westminster. How exactly does a regional mayor leverage all this local success to take on the prime minister? Well, it all comes down to a purely mechanical constitutional hurdle. How does a mayor become prime minister? In the UK, a party leader, and therefore a prime minister, must be a sitting member of parliament. A regional mayor simply cannot trigger a leadership challenge from outside the House of Commons. He absolutely needed a seat. Enter the unprecedented 2026 maneuver. Here's how it went down. Step 1. Labour MP Josh Simons strategically resigns his Makerfield seat, creating a vacancy tailor-made for Burnham. Step 2. Burnham runs in and wins the resulting by-election, officially re-entering Parliament. Now that he's back, Step 3 is where the trap is set. He just needs to trigger a leadership challenge by securing the backing of 81 Labour MPs. That's 20% of the parliamentary party. And his victory in that Makerfield by-election was incredibly decisive. Capturing 54.8% of the vote, Burnham comfortably held off Robert Kenyon from Reform UK, who took 34.5%. The rest went to other candidates. This was a really critical test for him. It essentially proved his ability to act as a sort of reform slayer, successfully neutralizing the populist surge that was threatening Labour's base and undeniably proving his electoral viability on a national level. But here is the ultimate paradox, sitting right at the center of this entire story. Burnham has spent nearly a decade building his brand as the fierce, outsider critic of Westminster's top-down orthodoxy. Yet to actually scale his regional model of Manchesterism nationally, he must successfully capture and then wield the very levers of the highly centralized British state that he ultimately wants to dismantle. He literally has to become the ultimate insider once again. So this leaves us with a massive question. If Andy Burnham actually manages to take the premiership, can Manchesterism truly scale to a national governing philosophy? Or will the deeply entrenched machinery and arithmetic of Westminster centralism ultimately prevail? It's a genuine turning point for British politics, and the outcome is going to change everything. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. We'll see how this all plays out.